I do want an opportunity to sort of talk a little bit about inclusionary zoning basics before I pass this off to Cameron, who's going to talk about some examples from around the country of what local jurisdictions have enacted in terms of IZ policies. And I'm going to shorten inclusionary zoning because it is a mouthful by calling it IZ. And Jess from Multiple Home is going to talk about the whole sort of suite of tools that we really need to address the housing affordability needs of our community members like Tamara, who, you know, if we have political will, if we have the correct conversations, if we continue to continue to talk about it, that we can have, so that we can have, you know, have more happy endings. So the Oregon Inclusionary Zoning Coalition, I just want to share a little bit about our vision. It's really the opportunity to create healthy communities with opportunities for prosperity. Prosperity for existing and future working families, immigrants, basically the people who live, work, play, and pray in our communities. As Tamara mentioned, we all should have a right to live in a safe, healthy neighborhood. Housing is a right. Housing is a right. I absolutely believe that. And I do believe that development is a privilege. And that's the basis of which, snaps to that, that I'm operating off of and that the Oregon IZ Coalition believes in strongly. So IZ is a land use tool that cities and counties across the country are using to create thousands of quality homes, housing units, although really they're homes, right? So it's not home units, in mixed income neighborhoods. IZ works best when it's customized to meet the needs of local communities. There's over 500 jurisdictions across the country that are using some form of inclusionary zoning to foster equitable communities and affirmatively further fair housing. As I mentioned before, Oregon and Texas are the only states in the country that have banned the use of the tool. So the Oregon IZ Coalition is really an alliance of over 35 community-based and public policy organizations. This includes housing organizations, racial justice organizations, advocates for the elderly and disabled, and even progressive developers that care about ensuring housing opportunities for everyone. So the ultimate goal is to repeal the ban on inclusionary zoning. And if you want to look up what it is, it's ORS 197.309. And we also want to encourage jurisdictions to promote local IZ policies. And how it works by securing a certain percentage of set-aside units in new developments for low to moderate income households, while providing developers certain offsets in consideration. So I read what I typed out on the sheet, but let me explain this in the way that I understand it. You have to think about a new building getting built in your community. Now, say that building is 100 units. A local inclusionary zoning policy could set a threshold, I'm making this up, 30%, right? And that 30% of those units, that would be 30 households, 30 units, would be below market rate. I'm emphasizing below market rate because it's not necessarily about the most vulnerable people in our communities. People who need supportive housing or who need heavily subsidized housing. Inclusionary zoning is not a tool that is aimed at helping them. Inclusionary zoning works best for moderate income households, working class households. And tonight, again, Cameron will be offering case studies from other cities that have adopted similar policies, and hopefully we can learn from some of those examples to how to advocate for housing affordability in our own neighborhoods. Portland's really struggling to keep up with demand for workforce housing, and many working families are struggling as a result. So I know that Southeast Uplift, as a part in partnering with us tonight, is really hoping to spark this conversation around solutions that hold the potential to create a Portland where everyone can prosper. So just a little bit of history around inclusionary zoning. Why do we have a ban, and why has it been over 15 years? And I hope I can do Metro right on the history here. I've got Counselor Stacy in the room.
Go for it. Don't worry about me.
But in the late 1990s, Metro, which is our tri-county regional government, initiated a process to analyze a whole broad range of housing and land use tools to ensure both an adequate supply and an equitable distribution of affordable housing across our region. I think if you spend any time here in Portland, you can see that we have a concentration of wealth and nice stuff in the middle of the city, and as you move away from that center, you start to get less nice stuff, less paved roads, and also less, quality housing. We have a lot of affordable housing in the city, but it's not affordable by design. So in the course of researching and analyzing all these tools, Metro identified inclusionary zoning as a possible tool that we could be using. So in 1999, the Oregon Home Builders Association passed a state prohibition through, at that time, the Republican-controlled legislature, which prevents jurisdictions from adopting policies that require housing set-asides in private developments at targeted income levels. I'm going to say that again so you can all understand how this works. So in 1999, the Oregon Home Builders Association, they passed a statewide prohibition in the state of Oregon through the Republican-controlled legislature. What it does is it prevents jurisdictions from adopting policies that require housing set-asides in private developments at targeted income levels. Subsequently, Metro has done a regional affordable housing strategy, RAHS, which was adopted in 2001, which contained aspirational affordable housing production goals, but lacked the teeth to achieve those targets. So what we have now is voluntary inclusionary zoning, but we don't have mandatory inclusionary zoning. A little about that later. So basically in the last 15 years, we've seen a lot of rising rents and housing prices across the metro region and other housing markets across the state. So low and moderate income families have been increasingly pushed out to the fringes. So we're talking outer southeast, outer northeast, East Portland, East County. That is further away from jobs, it's further away from good schools and healthy community centers. Right? So if you've driven out to East Portland, if you're trying to take the bus out to East Portland, it's like a ripple effect. Like the densest part of our city is in the middle, and folks are getting pushed out further and further out, where there's less transit service and less opportunities. So various efforts by housing advocates since then has really failed to make any progress on the issue. So in 2010, the organization that I'm working for, OPAL Environmental Justice Oregon, along with our core partners, the Community Alliance of Tenants, CAT, and the Center for Intercultural Organizing, CIO, we really took up the issue anew and began to try to shift the dialogue. In 2011, Representative Smith introduced a House bill to repeal the ban. And it received an informational hearing, and it was really an opportunity to rally a new racial, social justice, and health equity partners to the cause. In 2013, we started gaining a little bit more momentum. Representative Reardon introduced another bill which garnered strong support within the House. The House Human Services and Housing Committee passed a House bill, at that time it was 2890, but was forced back into the Committee for Reconsideration where it died. So it didn't go to the House floor at all for a vote. And I was a part of the Housing Affordability, Balance, and Choice work group. That was my first time ever participating. I'm a total newbie. I'm not a lobbyist, as you can tell. I'm just a community advocate. It was my first time ever participating in a housing work group. And it was, I'll be really frank, it was a really frustrating experience. I was the only person at that table under the age of 30. I was the only person who was still a renter. And it was interesting to kind of see, what conversations were being put forward and what conversations were sort of being actively held back. I don't want to throw anyone under the bus. It was a tough summer, talking a lot about really important issues across the state. We heard from many representatives representing Hood River, a lot of communities on the coast, talking about the real housing challenges the folks in their communities are having. But ultimately, the work group was designed as a consensus-based group. Therefore, knowing that we had the Home Builders Association seated at the table, we knew that it was never going to be prioritized coming out of that work group. So now, in 2015, Representative Williamson and Representative Kenny Geyer championed House Bill 2564, and it actually got passed on the House floor on April 23rd. It passed 34-25 with one exception, largely along party lines. Something that was really, really cool about that moment actually was that, so thinking back to 2013, Speaker Kotek essentially took the bill off from voting, and then this time she was carrying it to the floor for vote. So that was just really cool to see that happen. There's a lot of folks who really gave impassioned speeches about the importance of housing, of affordable homeownership. Representative Nose was one of them, Representative Helm, Gallegos, McLean, Evans, and Kenny Geyer. I mean, these are your representatives, so if they represent you, please, after tonight, shoot them a message and tell them thank you for prioritizing this bill. But now we are at the moment in time in which we have to pass the gauntlet of the Senate, and there's a lot of education that we have to do for inclusionary zoning with our senators. At the end of the evening, we're going to have a little bit, we're going to all talk about different ways that we can further this conversation in our communities. But I can't impress enough that the fight is not done. We're trying to lift this statewide ban on inclusionary zoning. We shouldn't have a blanket ban on something that works best at the local level. And so lifting it is almost just as challenging. We have communities all over the state who have endorsed this bill. Folks from Eugene, folks from Ashland, folks from, of course, Portland has notably been really out in front on this. But all of those areas of the state have extremely different housing needs, and they're all pointing to this tool and saying, whatever that tool looks like, we deserve to have this conversation at our own jurisdictional level. So give us that opportunity to have that conversation. The sort of analogy I use is it's like a mute button. Right now we have a mute button on inclusionary zoning. All that we're trying to do is to press unmute. Who knows what's going to happen when we do that, right? We want to be able to have those conversations at our own level. And I promise you that a local IZ policy in Portland is going to look really different from what they decide to do in Bend, right? But that's kind of the beauty of inclusionary zoning, is that it's highly customizable, and that it really works best when it's tailored to suit each community's needs. And I don't want to talk too much about what I know Cameron's going to be able to speak about. I also want to emphasize that affordable homeownership really is the ultimate goal, and it works best for folks kind of in this workforce housing range. And I promised I would try not to use too much jargon, but it really works best for folks in this 60 to 120% MHI, which is median household income. Homeownership is still primarily how we build wealth equity in this country. And this tool is going to be critical for closing the wealth inequity gap, especially for families of color. Earlier today, I was doing a little bit more research, and I want to share with you that according to the Pew Research Center in 2014, white households have approximately 10 times as much net assets as households of color, primarily because of the gap in homeownership. 10 times. For black families, it's 13 times. That's unacceptable. I'm not okay in living in a community where the gap is that large between myself and my neighbors. I also want folks to remember that inclusionary zoning and affordable housing, it's not just a Portland issue. There's almost about a dozen jurisdictions across the state that have endorsed this bill, House Bill 2564. And I'm really eager to have this tool specifically because of the need for affordable